May 15, 2016. It's a quiet night in Concord, California, a suburban community 30 miles east of San Francisco.
It's just one of those bedroom communities that grew and grew and grew.
Concord, California is a wonderful city. It has great schools, it has great neighborhoods. It's just a really nice place to raise a family.
But at 2:30 a.m., the quiet tranquility is broken by the sounds of sirens.
I was woken up in the middle of the night from my sergeant, and he asked that I respond for a possible homicide at Duck Pond at Newhall Park. A couple guys were out in the middle of the night going to fish, and they came across the victim.
This way, detectives.
Thank you, officer.
The scene was wrapped with crime tape. There was a couple officers out there kind of working scene security, and as I approached the pond, I could see the victim. She had a large laceration to her head that was obvious that she had suffered major trauma.
She had multiple fractures all over her face. She was beaten countless times, and she was also strangled. The attack was beyond brutal.
The victim had literally her fist shoved inside her mouth. And that's something I've never come across. It's right up there with some of the worst violence I've seen through the decades.
But who is this woman that suffered such a tragic fate?
Here you go, detective. Thank you.
The patrol cars have a portable fingerprint reader, and it's just like it sounds. You can take it out, put it up against somebody's thumb, then a match will show up.
When investigators scan the woman's prints, they get a hit.
The victim is 25-year-old Poinsettia Parks.
Born and raised in the suburbs of San Francisco, Poinsettia always stood out because of her small size.
Her friends called her Shorty. She was very, very small, very petite. She had the perfect smile, perfect teeth, these big bright eyes.
What Poinsettia lacked in stature, she more than made up for in personality.
She was petite, but she was very mighty, and she just had a personality that was larger than life.
She always could make you laugh, and a lot of friends were attracted to her kindness and her funniness.
She just really, truly loved other people.
Never one to shy away from the spotlight, Poinsettia discovered a passion for the performing arts early in life.
She was very good at acting. She was in the Wiz at Pleasant Hill Middle School. And everybody came up to me afterwards asking me, where did she learn how to act? Where did she learn how to sing?
And as she grew into a young woman, she was determined to turn her passion into a career path.
I said, well, Poinsettia, what do you want to do? And she said, I want to do children's theater. And I said, well, all you have to do is start.
But at the age of 17, Poinsettia's plans for her future were put on hold when she and her high school sweetheart, Tyler Combs, got some surprising news.
She found out she was pregnant. When she's pregnant, like, she'll stop everything she's doing. She'll eat healthy. She'll sit there and read to the baby. That's the type of mother she is.
And when her daughter Angelique was born, Poinsettia couldn't have been happier.
She was a good mother. Very, very energetic, very engaging.
It was always fun when I was with her. My mom was a happy person. She was goofy.
But as much as they loved their daughter, Poinsettia and Tyler struggled to adjust to their new role as parents.
It was difficult because she had postpartum depression for a while.
It was too expensive. How soon can two teenagers from the Bay Area get their stuff together? This is Silicon Valley. If you're not making 6 figures or more, how long is it really going to take for you to get it together?
Poinsettia and Tyler did not end up staying together. They broke up.
In the wake of the breakup, Poinsettia's family stepped in to help with baby Angelique.
Our great aunt would come get her every weekend. And then she was like, well, let me just keep her. Let me keep her until you get yourself together.
She wanted to be a good mom. And I would take her up to see her daughter. We'd go to the park.
And I remember being at the park with her and we were running around having fun. And she was just super joyful.
She was looking forward to doing whatever she had to do to get her back.
Even if that meant working around the clock to save up money for an apartment.
She wanted to better her life and be able to provide for her young daughter.
At that time, she worked in a beauty supply store, and then she also worked for security at Safeway, which everybody thought was hilarious because you got this tiny person chasing after criminals.
It was pretty dangerous, but she was just fearless.
By her early 20s, Poinsettia was also fearless in love.
She was dating, getting to know people.
She wanted somebody to be an equal, to be a partner, a supportive person, that you support them and they support you.
She doing anything?
Hi.
So when Poinsettia began building a relationship with 26-year-old Eric Lamar Nelson, he seemed like just the supportive partner she'd been searching for.
He wasn't scared off by the fact that she had a child.
She thought he was good looking. He was tall.
I'm really excited to go out tonight.
Yeah?
Work has been like really crazy.
The first time I was made aware of Eric was around Christmas. She had made like a Facebook post, you know, oh, the love of my life, and where would I be without you?
She never had a long, steady relationship for a long, long time. I think that's what she wanted.
And she finally found someone who was also along for the ride.
But now, Poinsettia has been found murdered at a park in Concord, California.
The brutality of it definitely stands out.
The amount of blows and damage was definitely shocking. She had lacerations all over her face. She had a broken nose. She had bruising from her chin down to her clavicle.
Her hand, was found in her mouth.
When her hand was removed, it was learned that her tongue was actually split in half. There's no way that you can look at the injuries that Poinsettia sustained and not think that this was personal.
Investigators believe Poinsettia's killer was trying to send a message.
I think the splitting of her tongue and shoving her hand in her mouth was symbolic.
To me, it seems that somebody might have been upset about something she was going to say.
That definitely is sending a message that I am silencing you.
But who was trying to silence Poinsettia, and why?
It's definitely something that would only be done with a lot of anger behind it.
"25-year-old Poinsettia Parks was working hard to create a safe haven for her young daughter, with her boyfriend Eric Nelson by her side.
She held 2 jobs. She was hardworking. She had goals.
She had the intent to get her daughter back and just starting anew.
But when Concord police discover Poinsettia brutalized and left for dead at a local fishing pond, the hunt is on for her killer.
It's obvious that there was some anger involved. Shoving someone's hand inside their mouth, it's definitely something that would only be done with a lot of anger behind it.
As investigators scour the area for clues, they discover that the fight for Poinsettia's life began in a nearby parking lot.
They found Poinsettia's wig kind of up near the parking lot area. They found a lot of different markings with blood.
It's plausible that some type of argument occurred in or around their car, that it became violent, and at some point, either the victim ran or the victim fought.
There was a struggle from the parking lot all the way down to the pond. There was a guardrail that separated the parking lot from the pond, and on that guardrail was a palm print, and it was blood.
We took photos of it, and we ended up taking the entire guardrail, preserved it.
As the sun comes up over Northern California, detectives head to the home of Poinsettia's mother, Andrella Bohanna.
Given these type of notifications, they're difficult. We knocked on the door, identified ourselves, and she could tell something was wrong immediately.
I look at him, and then I'm like, is it my daughter? And after they told me, I dropped to the floor and I just screamed and cried.
Andrella tells the detectives that Poinsettia's death is even more devastating because of something her daughter told her a few weeks earlier.
Poinsettia, she was pregnant.
She was expecting another child. She was 6 weeks pregnant.
She was trying to keep a secret. She was trying to hint around. But she can't hold water. She just had to blurt it out.
Do you know who the father of the child was?
Yes, his name is Eric Nelson.
Andrella tells detectives that Poinsettia and Eric had dated for about 9 months. But recently, the young couple split up.
With the added pressure of a pregnancy, their relationship just couldn't cut it.
Do you think he'd be involved in with what happened last night?
Eric? I don't think so.
I just didn't think of Eric that he would want to actually hurt her. I mean, I know they had arguments and stuff, but I didn't think he would hurt her.
Since her breakup with Eric, Andrella says her daughter had actually started dating someone new, a man named Gerald Cook.
What can you tell us about him?
Not much, but I know that he worked with Poinsettia. That's how they met.
Gerald also worked at the Safeway, where Poinsettia worked security.
The relationship started off as friends, and then you spend a lot of time with someone, you start developing like romantic feelings for them.
Detectives are eager to speak with Gerald Cook, but first, they have another important question for Poinsettia's mother.
Is your daughter's car here? We didn't locate it from the crime scene.
No.
Her car is a green 4-door vehicle. As far as her mom knew, Poinsettia doesn't share the car with anyone, so the car should have been wherever she is. It's very possible that the suspect is with her vehicle.
Police issued an APB advising law enforcement agencies in the area to keep an eye out for Poinsettia's car.
Thank you for your time, ma'am. We're sorry again for your loss.
The tragic news quickly spreads to the rest of Poinsettia's family.
I remember being with my aunt and she got a phone call and she stepped outside, and then when she came back she was crying and upset, and I kept asking her what happened. She didn't want to tell me, and then finally she told me, like, your mother passed away. I wasn't really sure what to think or how to feel in the moment. It definitely was a weird feeling.
I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. I fell to the ground and had an anxiety attack. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was being suffocated, like somebody was jumping up and down on my chest like it was a trampoline. So it just was very overwhelming.
Back at the station, detectives bring Poinsettia's new boyfriend, Gerald Cook, in for questioning.
Gerald was concerned. He wanted information. He wanted to know what happened.
She was found dead earlier this morning.
What?
He genuinely appeared to be upset learning what had happened to Poinsettia.
You two were in a dating relationship. Is that correct?
Well, we were. Until yesterday.
Gerald said that Poinsettia had just broken up with him hours before she was found dead.
At this point, you don't know how into this relationship Gerald was, right? And then it's cut off out of nowhere, and how would he react to that?
She had just broken up with him, and now she's dead. It's not looking good.
May 2016, Concord, California. Detectives investigating the brutal murder of pregnant mother Poinsetta Parks are speaking with a man she'd recently been dating before she was killed, a coworker named Gerald Cook.
You look at acquaintances, you look at friends, somebody caused these injuries. As far as who and why, you don't know yet.
And this was a very personal attack on her.
Gerald has just revealed that he and Poinsetta broke up the day before her body was discovered.
I think he was aware that it looked suspicious. She had just broken up with him, and now she's dead.
How long were you two together?
Since April.
They were dating about a month. She'd spent a lot of time with him, even spending time with his family.
Were there any issues between you and Poinsetta?
No, never.
He appeared to have genuine feelings for her.
He has nothing but positive things to say about my sister. Like, he really liked her.
He was hoping that they could become more serious.
But Gerald says Poinsetta wasn't on the same page.
When she called to break up with me, it was around 6:15 p.m. And that was on the 15th. Really? Are you sure?
It felt like just out of the blue, right?
She said she had made some type of plans to go down to Las Vegas.
She was going to move in with her sister.
I'm sorry. I just can't do the long distance thing right now.
She said, I need a new start. She didn't really specify what she wanted to do. She just needed to get out of the area. She needed a new environment. And so we agreed that she would come to Vegas and live with me and just start over.
When Poinsetta, broke it off with Gerald, he was obviously upset.
That's what you really want?
I'm sorry.
Bye.
You have to consider the possibility that this subject is scorned. He finds out possibly that this developing relationship is going to come to an end, and he could be upset about that. He could act out. He could get violent.
So where were you last night, Gerald?
I was at home, just playing video games, trying to take my mind off things.
Gerald insists he would never do anything to hurt Poinsetta, but he says there's someone else who might.
Have you guys talked to her ex-boyfriend, Eric?
No. Why?
Listen, that guy's a straight-up psycho.
According to Gerald, Eric Nelson has been acting strange ever since Poinsetta broke up with him.
Gerald informed detectives that her ex was showing up at her job. He had been keeping tabs on her.
He would come into the store and follow her around. Eric even broke a window in her car.
But is Gerald telling the truth, or is he just trying to lead investigators off his trail?
You have a conversation with Gerald, and you take the information you gather, and you consider it, but he's not ruled out yet.
You have to determine, what do I have that can prove or disprove his story?
Detectives begin reaching out to Poinsetta's friends and coworkers to verify Gerald's account of Eric Nelson's alarming behavior.
There were things that had happened in the past few weeks or past couple months that employees had witnessed related to Eric's badgering and hassling of Poinsetta.
When a friend of Poinsetta's named Justin Marsh comes in, he's able to provide detectives with shocking new details about the couple's tumultuous relationship.
Thank you for coming in, Justin.
Of course.
That particular friend, he took effort into trying to look after Poinsetta,
which meant protecting her from Eric.
This guy's dangerous.
This friend had noticed the escalation of his behaviors, and it wasn't just little things being said here and there. These were like big gestures, making threats, stalking her.
He had a lot of little bits that gave him justification for thinking that Eric was related to this.
Especially because of something that happened a couple weeks ago.
Apparently, before Poinsetta worked up the courage to leave Eric, she made a shocking discovery amongst his belongings.
He was using meth.
That was the final straw for her. Poinsettia didn't want her children around that.
She was ready to cut Eric out of her life for good.
So she sent Justin to return Eric's possessions.
He had brought property to Eric from Poinsettia just so she didn't have to see him. And when he dropped off this property, he was upset.
Well, Poinsettia at? She's not here. It's just me. Little.
He said that he was going to fuck her up.
Detectives investigating the murder of 25-year-old Poinsettia Parks have a new prime suspect, her ex-boyfriend and father of her unborn child, Eric Nelson.
He was stalking Poinsettia. He was harassing Poinsettia.
And Poinsettia's friend Justin says the situation had recently progressed into a ticking time bomb.
After they were broken up, she sent me to give him some of his stuff back.
She didn't want any contact with him.
Where Poinsettia? She's not here. It's just me.
What?
That little what?
He said, when I dropped off our property, Eric was upset, and he said that he was going to fuck her up.
Normal, rational people are gonna move on from that point. But in this case, his reaction, no. This guy wants a confrontation, is what he wants.
I ain't playing, man.
What's that supposed to mean? Huh?
Justin says not long after that, Eric paid Poinsettia a visit at work.
I just want to talk to you.
Leave me alone and get the hell out of here, please, Eric!
He became violent with Poinsettia.
Eric ripped her wig off, which is the ultimate form of like humiliation.
Now what?
He did that in front of people with the intention of embarrassing her, with the intention of demeaning her.
To detectives, this incident is especially telling.
They found Poinsettia's wig at the crime scene, ripped from her head, just like the incident Justin is describing. It suggests a pattern of abuse.
He just won't leave her alone.
Justin says as hard as Poinsettia tried to rid herself of Eric, he refused to back down.
What are you doing? I love you, I love you, I love you. I cannot live without you, baby. Please, I cannot live without you, baby.
There was an incident where apparently Eric had ingested pine salt and was chasing Poinsettia around saying he's going to kill himself and she's going to witness it.
This may have been his last-ditch effort to control her. Okay, you're gonna leave, I'm gonna kill myself so that you can live with this forever.
But Poinsettia held her ground.
I need to talk to you. Get out! I need to talk to you!
Poinsettia realized that the only way to finally rid herself of her ex was to leave town altogether.
Jesus. We spoke 2 days prior to her murder. She called me and she asked if she could come move to Las Vegas. And she said, you know, I want to just start over.
I think Poinsettia knew that she was in danger. And I think she knew that she had to get away.
Tragically, Poinsettia never got the chance to make her fresh start.
48 hours later, she was dead.
And detectives now believe they've identified the man responsible for taking her life.
Eric was the primary suspect in this investigation.
But tracking down Eric Nelson is complicated.
You try and find contact information for him, but he didn't have a recent address and he didn't have his own cell phone. He would borrow phones, so it was difficult.
Investigators discover that this isn't Eric's first run-in with the law. Not by a long shot.
Mr. Nelson had a pretty significant criminal history.
He had crimes of violence, he had property crimes, he had narcotic-related crimes.
While they wait for leads on Eric's whereabouts, investigators continue building their case against him. And when detectives receive a call from the coroner's office, they have another breadcrumb to follow.
During the autopsy, they look at the victim's clothes, and inside one of her front pockets, she had a receipt from the grocery store within a couple miles of the duck pond.
And so Concord Police Department pulled surveillance from that grocery store.
Just after the purchase was made inside the store, which was a notebook, she can be seen exiting the store.
And she's not alone.
Boom. That's him.
It's clear that she's exiting the store with Eric.
Investigators now have footage placing Eric with poinsettia just 4 hours before her body was discovered.
That's a huge piece of evidence, without question.
In the weeks before she was murdered, Poinsettia Parks was desperately trying to escape an abusive relationship with Eric Lamar Nelson.
Stop! Get out!
She definitely feared him, and she knew that she needed to physically and emotionally separate herself from him.
Now, homicide detectives have discovered surveillance video that places Poinsettia with Eric just a few hours before she was found dead in a local park.
Boom. That's him.
The fact that you see her exit the store with Eric is our first real solid digital evidence to show that he was physically with her really close to the time that she was located.
He was the last person to be seen with her.
But after days of searching for their suspect, Eric is still nowhere to be found.
Once police exhausted all their avenues to locate Eric, it became apparent he wasn't just a hard man to find. He was actually on the run.
There wasn't really anybody that you could go to and really develop good information on his whereabouts.
He had friends and family here and there that were willing to help him evade the law.
But detectives do get one useful tip from Eric's parole officer.
A lot of times, Eric would stay with his friend, Wayne Robbins. He could possibly be hiding out there.
We eventually contacted Wayne, who came down to speak to us.
In a police interview room, Wayne is reluctant to provide the investigators with much information.
Information had to be kind of pulled out of him. He gave a lot of yes and no, vague answers.
However, Wayne does admit that Eric showed up at his house around 1 a.m. on the night Poinsettia was killed.
What type of car was he driving?
A green sedan.
Eric showed up at his confidant's home in Poinsettia's car without Poinsettia.
Hey, man. You okay? I've been trying to reach you all night. Yeah, I'm fine.
He said that Eric his term was heartbroken about the separation from Poinsettia.
But Eric wasn't just heartbroken, he was also angry.
Mr. Nelson had a pretty significant criminal history, and at the time of this murder, Mr. Nelson was on parole for robbery.
Poinsettia had told Eric that she was going to contact his parole officer as like a last effort just to get him to stay away.
If Mr. Nelson didn't leave her alone, she was going to go to his parole agent and tell the agent about all the things that Mr. Nelson had been doing, including his harassment.
For detectives, this information calls to mind an important detail from the crime scene.
She was found with her tongue slit and her hand shoved in her mouth.
This was the first time and the only time we learned of any detail that could explain why Poinsettia had her hand shoved in her mouth.
It was symbolic of his efforts to silence her, to prevent her from speaking to his parole officer.
Where's Eric now?
I know, I haven't seen him since that night.
Wayne claims that when he woke up the next morning, Eric was gone, and so was Poinsettia's car.
But even with Eric still on the lam, police finally locate Poinsettia's missing vehicle on May 25th.
Poinsettia's car is found in Stockton, which I think is about 30 to 40 miles away.
It was located basically in a kind of an abandoned state. It had the driver's side window shattered.
They looked over the car and found that the car had intentionally been lit on fire.
The vehicle did not become completely engulfed, but there was a lot of black soot in the car. The passenger seat was destroyed during the fire.
Despite the extensive damage, one piece of evidence survived the blaze.
Look at this.
There was what appeared to be the rings from a notebook. That has relevance because Poinsettia had purchased a notebook at the grocery store that she was seen on video with Eric the night before she was located at the park.
It's even more evidence tying Eric to Poinsettia on the night she was killed. But where is he now?
They searched the car extensively. They canvassed the area, but no one knew where Eric was.
However, that changes when a call comes in to Concord police from out of state.
A little more than a week after Poinsettia was located, we received a call from Reno Police Department.
Detective Betrayal speaking.
Eric has stolen another vehicle.
He drove off the side of the road.
I believe it was a coward move.
For more than a week, California police have been searching for Eric Nelson, the prime suspect in the murder of Poinsettia Parks.
He was on the run. It's like we were right behind him each time.
But now, Concord detectives learn that after setting Poinsettia's car on fire and abandoning it in Stockton, Eric had stolen another vehicle.
He drove off the side of the road, off the side of the freeway. He was injured, but he was able to walk away from the collision.
He then hitched a ride from two Good Samaritans that didn't know who he was to a local church. And then at the church, he told the pastor that he was wanted for murder in California.
Fortunately, the pastor encouraged Eric to turn himself in.
Reno police at that time informed us that they had Eric in custody. I think that Eric, in the end, a lack of family, a lack of friends, a lack of locations to go to, he probably was tired of running.
Thanks. I'll be there soon.
When Concord detectives arrive in Reno, Eric agrees to speak with them.
He waived his Miranda rights and agreed to speak to me, but he was very limited in information that he would share.
Eric says the car crash was another attempt to take his own life.
I just don't want to be here anymore.
He, in his own words, tried to commit suicide.
I believe he didn't want to get shot down. I believe it was a coward move.
Did you kill Poinsettia?
No.
He didn't admit to being the primary suspect in this homicide. He didn't admit to being with Poinsettia at the time of the incident or prior.
And how do you explain this video from last Sunday?
I brought up the footage of Poinsettia and Eric in the grocery store, and he dismissed it, saying something similar to, "Oh, you've got video."
By the end of the interview, investigators are ready to charge him with first-degree murder.
I would have liked to have a confession, of course, but that would have been more the cherry. That wasn't the cake.
In this case, the evidence just speaks for itself.
And when Eric's trial begins in March 2021, prosecutors let the evidence do all the talking.
Mr. Nelson knew that Poinsettia was moving on, and he did not want her to move on.
He was losing his power and control. That's what it's about.
There was nothing that made me think that he was going to be content with their relationship coming to an end.
No one knew exactly how, but Eric must have talked Poinsettia into letting him accompany her to the store on the afternoon of May 15th.
I would think that they were spending time together, probably because Eric had forced himself upon her.
It's hard to completely cut the father of your child out of your life, which is why Poinsettia was planning to move to Las Vegas in the next couple of days.
I think that she knew that something was about to happen, and she was trying to buy herself some time.
They go to the park, they have a conversation. Something happens, something that makes Eric become super angry.
I need you to understand that this is over for good.
Mr. Nelson knew that either Poinsettia was going to be moving to Las Vegas with his child, or if he didn't leave her alone, she was going to snitch on him and tell his parole officer about the things that he had been doing.
He was a violent criminal. He had 2 strikes already.
In California, there's what's called the 3 strikes law. If Eric was convicted of another crime, he was running the risk of a life sentence.
Oh, you're gonna regret this.
Prosecutors believe that's what ultimately convinced Eric to silence Poinsettia forever.
He did what Eric does, get physical. And I can only imagine the brutality of it. It wasn't over in a second.
It's not easy to kill somebody, beating him to death. It takes time.
Seeing the injuries that were inflicted upon Poinsettia, I had never seen anything quite like that. It was such a vicious and sustained attack.
Poinsettia was 6 weeks pregnant, and it's like, wow, not only did you kill her, you also killed this baby that was inside of her. Just like, how evil could you be to do that?
As the prosecution rests their case, they offer one final piece of evidence they say proves Eric's guilt beyond any doubt.
When law enforcement processed the crime scene, they located a bloody handprint near the edge of the pond.
That palm print matched Mr. Nelson's palm print.
It doesn't take long for the jury to reach their verdict.
When the jury found Mr. Nelson guilty, I felt this overwhelming sense of just, thank you for serving justice. And I knew that Poinsettia's mom and her sister were right behind me in the courtroom.
I was relieved. It doesn't give you closure, though. None of it gives you closure.
The judge sentences Eric to 85 years to life in prison.
He don't need to be on the street. Justice needed to be served.
Hopefully Eric never gets out and never is in a position to do something like that to anybody else.
But even with Eric locked up for decades to come, Poinsettia's loved ones can never forget the horrors he inflicted on their family.
My sister died a brutal death. I'm talking about painful. The fact that my sister was screaming for her life and nobody heard her, like nobody was there. It's haunting. It's haunting to be a big sister.
She got taken away from me from when I was 7, and I haven't got to experience the mother-daughter relationship, and there's much more to come with that, which I won't get to experience.
He took a precious gift from God, a precious gift. Now she's up in heaven with the angels.
Abuse is never okay. If you or someone you love is in an abusive relationship, there is help available. Call the Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE.
New York City is a place where millions of stories unfold every single day. Some are ordinary, disappearing into the constant rhythm of traffic, conversations, and hurried footsteps. Others become impossible to forget. On July 17, 2014, under the bright summer sun of Staten Island, an encounter that lasted only a matter of minutes would become one of the most widely watched and intensely debated incidents in modern American history. It would leave behind not only questions about policing and accountability, but also a phrase that echoed far beyond the streets where it was first heard. This is the story of Eric Garner. Before his name appeared in headlines across the world, before news broadcasts replayed the same footage over and over again, before crowds gathered in cities carrying signs and demanding change, Eric Garner was simply another New Yorker beginning an ordinary summer afternoon. Staten Island has always occupied a unique place among New York City's 5 boroughs. Compared to Manhattan's endless towers or Brooklyn's crowded avenues, Staten Island often feels quieter, more suburban, separated from the city's relentless pace by the waters of New York Harbor. Neighborhoods blend residential streets with small businesses, corner stores, family-owned restaurants, and local gathering spots where residents recognize familiar faces. Bay Street, however, tells a different story. Stretching through the borough's North Shore, Bay Street is busy, noisy, and constantly moving. Delivery trucks rumble past storefronts. Buses stop every few minutes, releasing passengers who disappear into nearby shops. Taxi drivers weave through traffic while pedestrians cross intersections carrying grocery bags, coffee cups, or briefcases. The sidewalks become a meeting point for longtime residents, workers finishing their shifts, and people simply trying to make it through another day. Like many urban neighborhoods, the area also struggled with poverty, unemployment, and frequent police activity. Officers regularly responded to complaints involving minor offenses, quality-of-life violations, and disputes between residents. For many people living there, encounters with law enforcement had become an almost routine part of everyday life. It was within this environment that Eric Garner had spent much of his adult life. Born on September 15, 1970, Garner grew into an imposing man, standing approximately 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighing well over 300 pounds. His physical presence made him instantly recognizable. Friends and family often described him as someone with a loud laugh, a booming voice, and an outgoing personality. He was known in his neighborhood, not because he sought public attention, but because he spent so much of his time outdoors, talking with neighbors and familiar faces. Like many Americans, Garner's life had not followed a simple path. Public records show previous arrests for low-level offenses, including allegations involving the sale of untaxed loose cigarettes. Such cigarettes, commonly known as looses, are individual cigarettes removed from a legally purchased pack and sold separately without collecting applicable taxes. The practice had become a recurring enforcement issue in parts of New York City, where high tobacco taxes created incentives for illegal street sales. Although selling loose cigarettes was considered a violation of state tax laws, the offense itself was nonviolent. Yet repeated complaints often resulted in police responses. By the summer of 2014, Garner had experienced numerous encounters with law enforcement. According to public accounts and later investigations, he believed officers frequently targeted him. Whether those interactions were viewed as legitimate enforcement or unnecessary harassment depended greatly on whom one asked, but there was little dispute that Garner recognized many of the officers patrolling the neighborhood. That familiarity would matter. The afternoon of July 17 began much like countless other summer days. Temperatures climbed into the mid-80s. The air felt thick with humidity, and the heat settled over the pavement, causing distant buildings to shimmer beneath the afternoon sun. People sought shade beneath storefront awnings while others lingered outside local businesses, talking casually or watching traffic pass by. Nothing about the weather hinted that the day would become historic. Nearby surveillance cameras quietly recorded their surroundings. Cell phones rested inside pockets. Store owners served customers as usual. Vehicles moved steadily through intersections. The ordinary rhythm of city life continued uninterrupted. Somewhere among those routine moments, a complaint reached the New York Police Department. According to official accounts, officers were informed that someone was selling loose cigarettes outside a neighborhood business on Bay Street. Responding to such complaints was not unusual. Several officers were dispatched to the location. By the time they arrived, Eric Garner was standing outside near other individuals. Accounts differ regarding precisely what officers observed upon arrival, and Garner himself denied that he had been selling loose cigarettes. That disagreement would remain one of the earliest points of dispute surrounding the encounter. What is documented, however, is that officers approached Garner with the intention of speaking to him. Witnesses later recalled that Garner appeared frustrated almost immediately. Publicly released video captured portions of the interaction after it had already begun. The footage does not show what occurred before officers first approached him, leaving those opening moments dependent upon witness statements and official reports. Even so, one fact emerged consistently from multiple sources. Garner expressed irritation that officers had approached him once again. His words reflected someone who believed he was being singled out repeatedly. Investigations, testimony, and the widely circulated recording documented his frustration as he questioned why officers continued confronting him. The exchange remained verbal at first. People nearby watched. Some continued walking without stopping. Others slowed down. A few remained close enough to hear the conversation unfold. No one present could reasonably have predicted that within minutes, one of the most scrutinized police encounters in American history would begin. For many years before 2014, the relationship between police departments and many communities across the United States had already become the subject of national discussion. Incidents involving use of force, racial disparities, and community trust had generated protests in different cities. Although each case differed, they collectively contributed to growing public concern regarding accountability and transparency. At the same time, smartphones were transforming the way such encounters were documented. A decade earlier, many interactions between police officers and civilians existed only through official reports or eyewitness recollections. By 2014, nearly everyone carried a camera. That technological change would prove enormously significant. Standing only a short distance away from the developing confrontation was Ramsey Orta. Unlike many bystanders, Orta chose to record what he was seeing with his phone. His decision would preserve an uninterrupted visual record of much of what followed. That recording would later be viewed millions of times across television broadcasts, online platforms, classrooms, court proceedings, and public demonstrations. It would become central to nearly every discussion surrounding Eric Garner's death. At that moment, however, none of those future consequences could possibly have been known. There were no television crews. No reporters. No protesters. Only a handful of officers, one civilian who had begun recording, neighborhood residents going about their day, and a city continuing its ordinary afternoon. The confrontation gradually became more tense. According to official accounts, officers informed Garner that he was under arrest. Garner did not comply with efforts to place him in handcuffs. The reasons behind his resistance would later be debated extensively. Some viewed his actions as refusing a lawful arrest. Others interpreted his behavior as frustration rooted in repeated encounters with police over relatively minor allegations. Those differing interpretations would remain central to public discussion for years. What remains undisputed is that the encounter shifted from conversation to physical contact within a very short period of time. As voices grew louder, more attention turned toward the sidewalk. Pedestrians slowed. Heads turned. The ordinary sounds of Bay Street continued around them, traffic moving through intersections, engines idling, conversations drifting from nearby storefronts, but the focus of everyone standing nearby narrowed toward a single unfolding event. Within moments, the decisions made by several individuals would become the subject of investigations, courtroom proceedings, administrative hearings, academic research, public demonstrations, political speeches, and international debate. No one standing there could have anticipated the scale of what was about to happen. The afternoon still appeared, at least from a distance, like countless other police encounters taking place somewhere in New York City every day. Yet history often arrives without warning. It does not announce itself before ordinary moments become extraordinary. It does not reveal which conversation, which decision, or which few minutes will later reshape public memory. On that humid July afternoon in Staten Island, history was already beginning to unfold, one moment at a time. The events that followed would not only determine the fate of Eric Garner, but would also force an entire nation to confront difficult questions about policing, accountability, justice, and the value of a single human life caught in an encounter witnessed by the world. The story of Eric Garner did not begin on the sidewalk outside a neighborhood convenience store. It did not begin with a police radio transmission, a cell phone camera, or the words that millions of people would later hear repeated across television screens around the world. To understand why the encounter on July 17, 2014, became so significant, it is necessary to look at the life that came before it and the community in which it unfolded. Eric Garner was born on September 15, 1970, in Brooklyn, New York. Like countless other New Yorkers, his life was shaped by the city around him, its opportunities, its hardships, and its constant pace. Over the years he became known among family members, friends, and neighbors as a physically imposing man with an outgoing personality. Standing approximately 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighing well over 300 pounds, Garner was difficult to miss in a crowd. Those who knew him often recalled that despite his size, he enjoyed conversation and had a recognizable sense of humor. He spent much of his time outdoors, talking with people in his neighborhood rather than keeping to himself. By 2014, Garner was 43 years old and living on Staten Island's North Shore. Like many residents in the area, he faced economic challenges. Public records and interviews conducted after his death indicate that he worked various jobs throughout his life but also struggled to find stable employment. Supporting a family while dealing with financial uncertainty was not unusual in the neighborhood where he lived. The North Shore of Staten Island presented a striking contrast to the borough's quieter suburban image. While much of Staten Island was known for detached homes and residential streets, neighborhoods such as Tompkinsville and Stapleton reflected many of the economic pressures found in other parts of New York City. Small businesses lined Bay Street, serving local residents throughout the day. Bus routes connected the area to the Staten Island Ferry Terminal, bringing a steady flow of commuters and visitors. During the summer, sidewalks remained busy from morning until evening as people stopped to shop, meet friends, or simply escape the heat inside air-conditioned stores. Alongside everyday life, however, the community also experienced persistent challenges. Poverty rates were higher than in many other parts of Staten Island. Some residents relied on temporary work or public assistance. Small-scale street activity, including the illegal sale of untaxed cigarettes, drew regular attention from law enforcement. Officers assigned to the area responded to numerous complaints involving minor offenses that city officials considered important to neighborhood quality of life. New York City's enforcement policies during this period were influenced by strategies intended to address low-level offenses before they escalated into more serious crime. Supporters argued that visible enforcement improved public safety and responded to community concerns. Critics argued that the approach resulted in frequent police encounters over relatively minor violations, disproportionately affecting certain neighborhoods and communities. These broader debates formed part of the environment in which Eric Garner's final encounter with police occurred. Garner himself was familiar with local officers. Public records show that he had previously been arrested for various low-level offenses, including allegations involving the sale of untaxed loose cigarettes. These individual cigarettes, often referred to as looses, were sold one at a time rather than in unopened packs. Because New York imposed high taxes on tobacco products, selling individual untaxed cigarettes violated state tax laws. Although the offense was non-violent, enforcement efforts were common in neighborhoods where complaints were received. According to multiple public accounts, Garner believed he was repeatedly stopped and questioned by police. During his final encounter, he expressed frustration that officers were approaching him once again. That frustration did not emerge in isolation but reflected a history of prior interactions between Garner and local law enforcement. Health also played an important role in Garner's life. Medical records discussed during subsequent investigations documented that he suffered from asthma and had underlying heart disease. He was also obese. These conditions were significant because they later became contributing factors identified by the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner when determining the cause and manner of his death. At the time, however, they were simply part of Garner's everyday reality, affecting his physical well-being long before July 2014. On Thursday, July 17, New York experienced the warm, humid conditions typical of midsummer. The afternoon temperature climbed into the mid-80s, while humidity made the air feel considerably heavier. Heat radiated upward from sidewalks and asphalt streets. Local businesses welcomed customers seeking relief inside air-conditioned shops. Outside, people gathered in familiar places along Bay Street, talking with neighbors or waiting for buses. The neighborhood was active but otherwise ordinary. At approximately 3:30 p.m., officers from the New York City Police Department responded to a complaint concerning the alleged sale of loose cigarettes outside a business on Bay Street. Official accounts indicate that officers had received information suggesting that someone was selling untaxed cigarettes individually. When officers arrived, they focused their attention on Eric Garner. Exactly what occurred during the first moments of the interaction has remained a point of disagreement. Garner denied that he had been selling loose cigarettes. Officers, relying on the information they had received, continued their investigation. The publicly available cell phone recording began after the encounter was already underway, meaning the earliest exchanges were not captured on video. As a result, investigators later relied upon officer reports, witness statements, and other evidence to reconstruct those initial moments. The recording does, however, show that Garner appeared visibly frustrated. He questioned why officers continued approaching him and indicated that he believed he was being unfairly singled out. His comments reflected growing tension rather than immediate physical resistance. Several officers surrounded Garner as the conversation continued. At first, the interaction remained verbal. People nearby watched from short distances while others continued moving through the neighborhood. Few appeared to recognize that the encounter would soon become one of the most closely examined police incidents in recent American history. During this period, the relationship between law enforcement and many communities across the United States was already receiving increasing public attention. Incidents involving police use of force had prompted local protests in several cities, although none had yet reached the scale that would follow later in 2014. Discussions about transparency, accountability, and public trust were becoming more common among policymakers, journalists, and community leaders. Technology was also changing how such encounters were documented. Smartphones capable of recording high-quality video had become widely available. Increasingly, members of the public documented events they witnessed, creating visual records that could later be reviewed alongside official reports. This development altered the public's ability to observe police-civilian encounters directly rather than relying solely on written accounts. Among those present on Bay Street was Ramsey Orta, a local resident who began recording the interaction with his cell phone. His recording would later become one of the most widely viewed pieces of evidence associated with the case. News organizations around the world broadcast portions of the footage, while investigators, attorneys, journalists, and members of the public carefully examined it frame by frame. At the moment recording began, however, Orta could not have known the historical importance his video would later assume. The officers continued speaking with Garner. According to official accounts, they informed him that he was under arrest. Garner did not submit to being handcuffed, and the situation quickly became more tense. The disagreement shifted from words toward physical contact in only a matter of seconds. Everything that followed would later be reviewed through multiple investigations, including examinations by local authorities, the New York City Medical Examiner, federal investigators, and administrative proceedings within the NYPD. The incident would also become the focus of extensive public debate, legal analysis, and media coverage for years afterward. As the confrontation moved toward its decisive moment, the sidewalk outside the Bay Street business remained filled with ordinary signs of city life. Cars continued passing through nearby intersections. Businesses remained open. Pedestrians slowed to watch. Some stood silently. Others held their phones. What none of them could know was that the events about to unfold would transform a local police encounter into a case that would resonate far beyond Staten Island, influencing conversations about policing, accountability, and civil rights across the United States for years to come. The next few minutes would become the center of those discussions, preserved on video and examined from every possible angle. They would also mark the final moments of Eric Garner's life. On the afternoon of July 17, 2014, Bay Street looked much as it did on countless other summer days. Traffic moved steadily through the neighborhood. People entered and exited nearby stores carrying shopping bags, drinks, or food. Conversations drifted across the sidewalk as residents paused to greet one another. The July heat settled over the pavement, and the afternoon unfolded with the familiar rhythm of a New York City neighborhood. Nothing about the scene suggested that it would soon become the focus of worldwide attention. According to official accounts, officers from the New York City Police Department had responded to a complaint that someone was selling untaxed loose cigarettes outside a local business. Such calls were not unusual. Officers assigned to the area routinely responded to quality-of-life complaints, including allegations involving minor violations of city or state law. When officers arrived, their attention turned to Eric Garner. Exactly what happened during the first moments of the interaction has never been captured on video. The cell phone recording that would later become central to the case began after officers had already started speaking with Garner. As a result, investigators relied on a combination of police reports, witness statements, and the available video evidence to reconstruct the sequence of events. The recording begins with Garner standing on the sidewalk, surrounded by several officers. He appears visibly frustrated, speaking with animated gestures. Publicly released footage captures him saying that officers seemed to approach him every time they saw him, expressing his belief that he was being repeatedly singled out. He denied that he had been selling loose cigarettes and insisted that he had done nothing wrong. The exchange remained verbal during these opening moments. Several officers stood around Garner while pedestrians continued moving through the neighborhood. Some slowed to watch. Others continued walking, paying little attention. A few people stopped entirely, sensing that the conversation was becoming increasingly tense. Although the encounter was unfolding in public, there was no indication that anyone present believed it would become a defining national story. Garner was a large man, standing approximately 6 feet 3 inches tall and weighing well over 300 pounds. His physical size was immediately noticeable, but the video also shows that, during the early portion of the encounter, he remained standing and speaking rather than attempting to flee the scene. According to official accounts, officers informed Garner that he was under arrest. When they attempted to place him in handcuffs, Garner did not comply. The reasons for his refusal became a subject of extensive public discussion in the years that followed. Some observers viewed his actions as resisting a lawful arrest. Others believed his response reflected frustration stemming from previous encounters with law enforcement over similar allegations. Those differing interpretations became part of the broader public debate, but the available evidence consistently shows that Garner did not run from the officers. Instead, he remained where he was while continuing to protest the arrest verbally. As the officers moved closer, the atmosphere changed rapidly. The distance between conversation and physical confrontation narrowed within seconds. The cell phone recording captures officers attempting to gain control of Garner's arms. Multiple officers surrounded him, limiting the space in which he could move. People nearby watched more closely, recognizing that the situation was escalating. One of the officers present was Daniel Pantaleo. During the encounter, Pantaleo moved behind Garner. Video evidence shows Pantaleo placing his right arm around Garner's neck and upper shoulder area while attempting to bring him to the ground. Following the incident, considerable attention focused on this maneuver because the New York City Police Department had long prohibited chokeholds as a restraint technique. Whether the maneuver constituted a prohibited chokehold became an important issue during later investigations and administrative proceedings. The NYPD's internal disciplinary process ultimately concluded that Pantaleo had used a prohibited chokehold and other improper tactics, findings that contributed to his dismissal from the department in 2019. Immediately after physical contact began, Garner lost his balance and fell to the sidewalk. Several officers followed him to the ground. The encounter unfolded quickly. Video evidence shows Garner lying face down while officers continued efforts to restrain him. Multiple officers were involved in securing his arms and body as they attempted to complete the arrest. Within moments of being restrained, Garner began repeating words that would become known around the world. He repeatedly stated that he could not breathe. Those words are clearly audible on the publicly available recording. He continued repeating them as officers maintained physical control. The exact number of repetitions has been analyzed by journalists, researchers, and legal observers over the years, with different counts depending on the methodology used. Regardless of the precise number, the recording unmistakably documents Garner saying that he could not breathe multiple times during the restraint. The video also records him saying "please" and "I'm done." These statements became central pieces of evidence during subsequent investigations because they documented Garner's condition while he remained restrained. Throughout the encounter, bystanders reacted in different ways. Some watched silently. Others questioned the officers about Garner's condition. Their voices can be heard on the recording, expressing concern as the situation continued. The officers remained focused on completing the arrest. The restraint lasted for several minutes. During that period, Garner gradually became less responsive. Eventually, his movements diminished. Witnesses later stated that they believed he appeared to be in medical distress before emergency medical personnel arrived. The timing and adequacy of the medical response later became subjects of public discussion and official review. Emergency medical services were requested. When responders arrived, Garner was eventually transported to Richmond University Medical Center. Despite medical treatment, he was pronounced dead later that afternoon. His death immediately transformed what had begun as an arrest for a suspected low-level offense into a death investigation. The New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner later conducted an autopsy. The medical examiner determined that the manner of death was homicide, a medical classification indicating death caused by the actions of another person. The report identified compression of the neck and chest during physical restraint as contributing factors, along with Garner's asthma, heart disease, and obesity. Importantly, the medical classification of homicide does not by itself determine criminal liability, rather, it describes the manner in which death occurred for forensic purposes. As news of Garner's death spread, attention quickly turned to the cell phone recording made by Ramsey Orta. Unlike many previous incidents that relied primarily on conflicting witness accounts, much of this encounter had been captured on video. News organizations obtained copies of the footage within days. Television networks broadcast portions repeatedly. Online platforms allowed millions of viewers to watch the encounter for themselves. The video's widespread circulation fundamentally shaped public understanding of the case. It became one of the most recognizable recordings of a police-civilian encounter in American history. Public reaction was immediate and deeply divided. Many viewers focused on Garner's repeated statements that he could not breathe and questioned the level of force used during the arrest. Others emphasized that officers were attempting to carry out what they believed was a lawful arrest after Garner refused to comply. These competing interpretations influenced public conversations, media coverage, and legal proceedings throughout the years that followed. As investigators began collecting evidence, They examined multiple sources, including the cell phone recording, police reports, witness interviews, dispatch records, medical findings, and departmental policies governing use of force. Every second of the video would later be reviewed repeatedly by investigators, attorneys, journalists, independent experts, and the public. The case soon extended far beyond Staten Island. It became part of a broader national discussion concerning police practices, accountability, transparency, and public trust. What had started as a response to a complaint involving alleged untaxed cigarettes had evolved into one of the most consequential law enforcement cases of the decade. For Eric Garner's family, however, the national debate unfolded alongside a far more personal reality. A husband, a father, and a member of their family had died following an encounter with police. While legal questions and public policy discussions would continue for years, those closest to Garner were left confronting an immediate and irreversible loss. The investigation that followed would seek to answer difficult questions about what occurred on Bay Street that afternoon, how departmental policies had been applied, whether any laws had been violated, and what consequences, if any, would follow. Those questions would move from the sidewalk where the encounter occurred into courtrooms, hearing rooms, government offices, and ultimately into one of the most significant public conversations about policing in modern American history. The hours following Eric Garner's death marked the beginning of multiple investigations that would unfold over several years. What had started as an arrest outside a neighborhood business on Bay Street was no longer treated solely as a routine police encounter. It had become a death investigation involving local authorities, medical examiners, internal police investigators, prosecutors, and eventually the United States Department of Justice. As emergency medical personnel transported Garner from the scene to Richmond University Medical Center, officers remained in the area to complete the initial procedures required after a serious use of force incident. The sidewalk where the confrontation had taken place was no longer simply another section of Bay Street. It had become a location of evidentiary importance. Investigators documented the scene using standard investigative methods. They identified the officers involved, noted the locations where the encounter occurred, and began collecting information from individuals who had witnessed portions of the incident. Because the interaction had taken place in a public area during the middle of the afternoon, numerous potential witnesses had either observed events directly or arrived shortly afterward. Their recollections varied in detail, reflecting the different positions from which they had viewed the encounter. Some had seen only the final moments. Others had observed the interaction from its verbal beginning through the physical restraint. As in many investigations involving rapidly unfolding public events, investigators compared witness accounts with available physical evidence in an effort to establish the most accurate possible timeline. One piece of evidence quickly distinguished this case from many previous police use of force investigations. A civilian had recorded much of the encounter. Ramsey Orta's cell phone video soon became one of the most important sources of evidence available to investigators. Unlike written reports prepared after an incident, the recording preserved much of the interaction as it unfolded. Although it did not capture the very beginning of the encounter, it documented the escalation from a verbal exchange to the physical restraint and the moments that followed. Investigators obtained the recording and began reviewing it carefully. The video would eventually be examined countless times by law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, defense attorneys, journalists, independent experts, researchers, and members of the public. Individual frames were analyzed repeatedly in an effort to understand the sequence of events, the actions taken by the officers involved, and Garner's physical condition throughout the restraint. The recording also became significant because it captured statements made during the encounter that could later be compared with medical findings and witness testimony. At the same time, investigators gathered official documentation generated during the incident. Dispatch records, officer reports, radio communications, and arrest paperwork became part of the investigative file. These materials helped establish when officers had been dispatched, when they arrived, and what actions were reported after the encounter concluded. The investigation was not limited to law enforcement documentation. Medical evidence would become equally important. Following Garner's death, the New York City Office of Chief Medical Examiner conducted an autopsy to determine both the cause and manner of death. Autopsies in cases involving deaths during law enforcement encounters serve several purposes. They document injuries, identify underlying medical conditions, and assist investigators in understanding the physiological factors that contributed to the death. The medical examiner concluded that Eric Garner's death was a homicide in the medical sense of the term. The report identified compression of the neck and compression of the chest during physical restraint as contributing factors. It also noted significant underlying medical conditions, including asthma, heart disease, and obesity, which were determined to have contributed to the fatal outcome. The medical examiner's classification of homicide received widespread public attention. Forensic experts emphasized an important distinction. In medical terminology, homicide describes a death resulting from the actions of another person. It is a classification used for death certification and does not itself determine whether criminal conduct occurred. Decisions regarding criminal responsibility remain matters for prosecutors and courts rather than medical examiners. That distinction would become central to later public discussions. The autopsy findings immediately became part of the evidence reviewed by prosecutors and investigators. They also informed later analyses conducted by legal experts, medical professionals, and independent commentators examining the case. Within the New York City Police Department, internal review processes also began. Whenever a death occurs during or following a police encounter, departmental procedures require administrative examination of the officer's actions. Investigators sought to determine whether departmental policies governing use of force had been followed and whether any violations had occurred. Attention quickly focused on the physical restraint visible in the cell phone recording. The NYPD had prohibited chokeholds for many years before 2014. During later proceedings, investigators examined whether the maneuver used during Garner's arrest met the department's definition of a prohibited chokehold and whether officers complied with applicable training and operational guidelines. Those questions would not be resolved immediately. Instead, they became subjects of lengthy administrative review extending well beyond the initial criminal investigation. Outside the police department, the Richmond County District Attorney's Office began reviewing the evidence to determine whether criminal charges were appropriate. Prosecutors gathered witness testimony, examined physical evidence, reviewed medical findings, and analyzed the available video recording. The investigation proceeded through the grand jury process established under New York law. A grand jury does not determine guilt or innocence. Instead, it considers whether sufficient evidence exists to support criminal charges. The proceedings are conducted in private, and prosecutors present evidence while jurors decide whether an indictment should be issued. Because grand jury proceedings are confidential, much of the evidence presented during that phase of the investigation remained unavailable to the public. As legal processes continued, the case rapidly attracted national attention. The cell phone recording spread across television broadcasts, news websites, and social media platforms. Millions of viewers watched the encounter, many seeing it repeatedly as news organizations replayed portions of the footage during continuing coverage. Public reaction was immediate. Some viewed the recording as compelling evidence that excessive force had been used during the arrest. Others argued that the officers had been attempting to control a suspect whom they believed was resisting arrest. These differing interpretations shaped public debate from the earliest days following Garner's death. Civil rights organizations called for independent investigations and greater transparency regarding police use of force. Community leaders organized vigils and public gatherings to remember Garner while also raising broader concerns about relationships between law enforcement and the communities they served. Media coverage expanded beyond the specific facts of the case. Journalists examined NYPD policies, use of force training, and enforcement practices involving low-level offenses. Reports explored the city's approach to quality-of-life policing, the enforcement of untaxed cigarette laws, and previous complaints concerning police-community interactions. As these discussions developed, the phrase, "I can't breathe," documented in the cell phone recording, became widely recognized. The words appeared on signs carried during demonstrations, in newspaper headlines, and across social media. They became associated not only with Eric Garner's death but also with broader conversations about policing and accountability in the United States. Investigators, however, remained focused on assembling evidence. They continued reviewing witness statements, medical findings, departmental policies, and video evidence in an effort to determine precisely what had occurred and whether any laws or regulations had been violated. The availability of video evidence made this investigation unusual but not necessarily simple. Video can document important events, yet it may not capture every relevant angle, every preceding action, or every surrounding circumstance. Investigators therefore considered the recording alongside other forms of evidence rather than treating it as the sole source of information. Experts in policing, medicine, and forensic investigation also became involved in analyzing aspects of the case. Questions concerning restraint techniques, positional asphyxia, medical distress, officer training, and emergency response procedures all became subjects of careful examination. Those analyses extended well beyond the initial weeks following Garner's death. For Eric Garner's family, the investigation represented more than a legal process. Family members publicly expressed their desire for accountability and transparency while mourning the loss of a husband, father, and relative. Their efforts would continue for years, both through legal proceedings and through public advocacy. At the same time, the officers involved also became the focus of intense public scrutiny. Their actions were examined not only by investigators but also by news organizations, elected officials, legal commentators, and members of the public. The widespread circulation of the cell phone recording ensured that virtually anyone could view portions of the encounter and form opinions regarding what had occurred. By the end of the summer of 2014, the investigation had grown far beyond Staten Island. Local authorities continued their work, but federal officials were also monitoring developments. Questions concerning potential civil rights violations would eventually lead the United States Department of Justice to open its own investigation, adding another layer to an already complex legal process. What had begun as an afternoon response to a complaint about alleged untaxed cigarette sales had evolved into one of the most closely watched investigations involving police use of force in recent American history. The evidence would continue to be reviewed for months. Legal proceedings would continue for years. Administrative hearings, civil litigation, and federal review still lay ahead. The search for answers had only begun, and each new stage of the investigation would bring renewed public attention, further legal analysis, and continuing debate over one of the most consequential police encounters of the 21st century. As the investigation progressed through the second half of 2014, attention shifted from the sidewalk on Bay Street to courtrooms, government offices, and conference rooms where evidence was being reviewed. The immediate questions surrounding Eric Garner's death were no longer limited to what had happened during the arrest. Investigators now faced a different set of questions. Did the available evidence support criminal charges? Were departmental policies violated? And if mistakes had been made, would those mistakes lead to legal accountability? The Richmond County District Attorney's Office presented the case to a grand jury, the body responsible under New York law for determining whether sufficient evidence existed to issue a criminal indictment. Unlike a criminal trial, grand jury proceedings are conducted in private. Witnesses may testify, prosecutors present evidence, and jurors evaluate whether probable cause exists to proceed with criminal charges. The process does not determine guilt or innocence, it determines only whether a case should move forward. Over the course of the proceedings, the grand jury reviewed evidence gathered during the investigation. That evidence included witness testimony, police reports, medical findings, and the cell phone video recorded by Ramsey Orta. Because the proceedings remained confidential under New York law, the complete presentation of evidence was never made public. As a result, many details of the deliberations remained unknown outside the courtroom. On December 3, 2014, the grand jury announced its decision. It declined to indict Officer Daniel Pantaleo. The announcement immediately became national news. For many people, the decision marked the end of one legal process. For others, it raised new questions about how deaths involving law enforcement officers were investigated and whether existing legal standards adequately addressed such cases. Public reaction was swift and widespread. Demonstrations took place across New York City, particularly in Manhattan and Staten Island. Similar protests appeared in Washington, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and numerous other cities. Participants came from different backgrounds, but many shared concerns about police accountability and the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they served. During these demonstrations, one phrase appeared repeatedly on signs, clothing, and banners. "I can't breathe." The words documented in Ramsey Orta's recording became a powerful symbol that extended far beyond Eric Garner's individual case. For many demonstrators, they represented broader concerns about policing, race, and the use of force. The phrase became associated with calls for reform and was repeated at marches, public meetings, and community events across the country. News organizations devoted extensive coverage to the case. Legal analysts examined the grand jury process, explaining the difference between criminal standards of proof and public expectations. Former prosecutors discussed the challenges of proving criminal intent in cases involving police use of force. Civil rights advocates argued that the outcome demonstrated the need for systemic reform. Law enforcement organizations emphasized the importance of allowing legal processes to operate independently and cautioned against reaching conclusions outside the courtroom. The case quickly became one of the defining public discussions of 2014. It also unfolded during a period of heightened national attention on policing in the United States. Other high-profile incidents that year contributed to broader conversations about transparency, accountability, community trust, and officer training. Although each case involved different facts and legal issues, together they intensified public debate about how police encounters should be investigated and reviewed. While demonstrations continued, another investigation remained underway. The United States Department of Justice opened a federal civil rights investigation to determine whether evidence supported federal criminal charges. Federal prosecutors examined whether there was sufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that a law enforcement officer had willfully violated Garner's constitutional rights, a legal standard that differs significantly from state criminal law and is generally considered difficult to satisfy. Federal investigators conducted their own review of the available evidence. They examined the cell phone recording, interviewed witnesses, reviewed medical reports, analyzed departmental policies, and considered applicable federal law. This investigation proceeded independently of the state grand jury process and continued for several years. At the same time, the New York City Police Department continued its internal administrative review. Administrative investigations differ from criminal investigations. Rather than determining criminal liability, they evaluate whether an officer complied with departmental rules, training, and professional standards. Violations of departmental policy can result in disciplinary action even when criminal charges are not filed. Among the issues examined was the restraint technique used during Garner's arrest. The NYPD had prohibited chokeholds for decades before the incident. Investigators analyzed whether the maneuver visible in the video violated that policy and whether officers followed department procedures governing the use of force and supervision during arrests. These reviews required careful examination of departmental training materials, officer testimony, expert analysis, and video evidence. Meanwhile, Eric Garner's family continued speaking publicly about their loss. Family members participated in interviews, attended community events, and called for accountability. They emphasized that, beyond the legal proceedings and national headlines, they were grieving the death of a husband, father, grandfather, and brother. Garner's daughter, Erica Garner, became one of the family's most visible advocates. She participated in public demonstrations and spoke about her father's life as well as her hopes for reforms that might reduce the likelihood of similar incidents in the future. Her advocacy brought additional public attention to the family's perspective during the years following the incident. The city of New York also faced civil litigation arising from Garner's death. Civil lawsuits differ from criminal prosecutions. Rather than determining criminal guilt, civil proceedings address legal responsibility and potential financial damages. In 2015, the city reached a settlement with Garner's family, resolving the wrongful death lawsuit without a trial. The settlement did not constitute a criminal finding regarding the officers involved but represented the resolution of the family's civil claims against the city. As legal proceedings continued, policymakers and law enforcement agencies around the country examined whether existing practices should change. One issue receiving increasing attention involved body-worn cameras. Although Ramsey Orta's cell phone video provided crucial evidence in this case, many officials argued that recordings made directly by officers could provide additional perspectives during future encounters. In the years that followed, body camera programs expanded substantially across many police departments in the United States, though implementation varied by jurisdiction. Training related to de-escalation, medical emergencies, and use of force reporting also became subjects of renewed discussion. Experts debated how officers should respond when restrained individuals indicate medical distress, how quickly emergency medical assistance should be provided, and how departments should review incidents involving serious injury or death. In August 2019, the NYPD completed its internal disciplinary process. Following an administrative trial, the department concluded that Daniel Pantaleo had violated departmental policies, including the prohibition against chokeholds. Police Commissioner James O'Neill accepted the recommendation that Pantaleo be dismissed from the department. Pantaleo was subsequently terminated from the New York City Police Department. The administrative outcome differed from the earlier criminal proceedings because the legal standards and purposes were different. Administrative discipline evaluates compliance with departmental rules, whereas criminal prosecutions require proof beyond a reasonable doubt under applicable criminal statutes. Later that same year, the Department of Justice announced that it would not pursue federal criminal charges. Federal prosecutors concluded that the available evidence was insufficient to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the legal standard required under the federal civil rights statute had been met. The announcement marked the conclusion of the major criminal investigations arising from Eric Garner's death. Yet the broader impact of the case continued. Researchers, legal scholars, journalists, policymakers, and community organizations continued examining what happened on Bay Street and what lessons might be learned. Training materials, academic studies, legislative proposals, and public policy discussions frequently referenced the case when addressing police accountability and the use of force. Years after the encounter, Eric Garner's name remained closely associated with ongoing conversations about policing in America. The cell phone recording continued to be studied in law schools, criminal justice programs, journalism courses, and police training environments as officials and scholars sought to understand both the specific incident and its broader implications. The legal proceedings had largely concluded. The public conversation had not. What began as a response to an allegation involving untaxed cigarettes had evolved into one of the most consequential law enforcement cases of the decade, influencing debates that would continue long after the investigations themselves had ended. By the time the major legal proceedings had concluded, Eric Garner's case had become more than a single investigation. It had entered the broader history of American criminal justice, policing, and civil rights. While prosecutors, medical experts, and administrative officials had completed their respective reviews, public discussion continued in classrooms, legislative chambers, police academies, and community meetings across the United States. Unlike many criminal cases that gradually fade from public attention after court proceedings end, the death of Eric Garner remained part of an ongoing national conversation. The widespread availability of the cell phone recording ensured that the incident could be revisited repeatedly. Journalists, researchers, legal scholars, and policymakers continued examining the evidence, often asking not only what had happened on July 17, 2014, but also what lessons might be drawn from it. One of the most immediate consequences involved renewed attention to police use of force policies. Many law enforcement agencies reviewed existing training concerning physical restraint techniques, particularly those involving the neck or upper body. Departments examined whether their policies clearly prohibited dangerous restraint methods, whether officers received sufficient refresher training, and whether supervisors adequately monitored compliance with departmental standards. Some agencies strengthened existing restrictions on chokeholds or neck restraints. Others revised reporting requirements following significant uses of force, requiring more detailed documentation and supervisory review whenever officers used physical restraint during arrests. Although these policy changes varied from one jurisdiction to another, the broader discussion reflected an increased awareness of the risks associated with certain restraint techniques, especially when individuals had underlying medical conditions or displayed signs of respiratory distress. Another area receiving increased attention was officer training. Police instructors emphasized communication, de-escalation strategies, and methods intended to reduce the likelihood that routine encounters would become physical confrontations. Departments expanded scenario-based training designed to help officers evaluate rapidly changing situations while balancing public safety, legal authority, and the safety of everyone involved. Medical response also became an important subject of review. Experts in emergency medicine and law enforcement discussed the importance of recognizing signs of medical distress during arrests. Training materials increasingly emphasize that once an individual is restrained, officers must continue assessing that person's condition and obtain medical assistance whenever necessary. These discussions were not limited to New York City. Across the United States, professional organizations, policing experts, and public officials cited the Garner case while evaluating existing practices. Although each department maintained its own policies and legal obligations, the incident became one of several high-profile cases influencing national conversations about best practices in law enforcement. Technology also continued to evolve. When Eric Garner died in 2014, body-worn cameras had not yet been adopted by every police department. In the years that followed, many agencies expanded or introduced body camera programs. Supporters argued that recordings could improve transparency, preserve evidence, and strengthen public confidence in investigations involving police encounters. Body cameras did not eliminate controversy or prevent every disputed incident, but many departments viewed them as one tool capable of providing additional evidence beyond witness statements and written reports. The conversation extended beyond policing itself. Legal scholars examined the standards governing criminal prosecutions of law enforcement officers. They explained that proving criminal liability requires meeting specific legal elements established by statute and demonstrating guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Administrative proceedings, civil litigation, and criminal prosecutions each apply different legal standards and pursue different objectives. These distinctions often became difficult for the general public to understand, particularly in highly publicized cases. The Garner investigation illustrated how a single incident could produce multiple parallel proceedings. There was the criminal review conducted through the state grand jury. There was the federal civil rights investigation. There was the internal disciplinary process within the New York City Police Department. There was civil litigation brought by Garner's family. Each process addressed different legal questions and reached conclusions under different evidentiary standards. understanding those distinctions became an important part of public education surrounding the case. Meanwhile, Eric Garner's family continued their efforts to honor his memory. His daughter, Erica Garner, emerged as a prominent advocate for criminal justice reform and community engagement. Through public appearances, interviews, and demonstrations, she spoke about her father's death while encouraging continued dialogue regarding accountability and fairness within the criminal justice system. Following Erica Garner's death in 2017, many individuals who had worked alongside her reflected on her commitment to public advocacy and her determination to keep attention focused on issues she believed required reform. Community organizations also continued organizing educational events, discussions, and memorial gatherings. For some participants, these events centered specifically on remembering Eric Garner. For others, they served as opportunities to discuss broader issues involving police-community relationships, constitutional rights, public safety, and trust. The case also influenced academic research. Universities incorporated it into courses covering criminal justice, constitutional law, public administration, journalism, ethics, sociology, and public policy. Researchers examined not only the legal proceedings themselves but also the role of video evidence, media coverage, public opinion, and institutional accountability. Journalism scholars frequently reference the cell phone recording made by Ramsey Orta when discussing citizen journalism and the growing role of smartphones in documenting public events. Prior to the widespread use of smartphones, many incidents involving police encounters depended almost entirely upon official reports and witness recollections. The Garner case demonstrated how civilian recordings could become central pieces of evidence, influencing investigations, media coverage, and public understanding. At the same time, legal experts cautioned that video evidence, while valuable, does not always capture every relevant circumstance. Camera angles, recording start times, visual limitations, and events occurring outside the frame remain important considerations during investigations. As a result, investigators continued emphasizing the need to evaluate video alongside witness testimony, forensic evidence, medical findings, and other available information. Throughout the years following Garner's death, public officials frequently revisited questions concerning transparency. Many departments adopted policies requiring earlier public release of certain investigative information following critical incidents, although practices varied considerably among jurisdictions. Officials sought to balance transparency with legal obligations, privacy considerations, and the integrity of ongoing investigations. The case also contributed to continuing discussions about public trust. Trust between communities and law enforcement develops over time through countless everyday interactions rather than through a single policy change. Researchers observed that improving trust often requires consistent communication, accountability mechanisms, community engagement, and fair enforcement practices. These conversations remained active long after the investigations concluded. Looking back, historians increasingly viewed the summer of 2014 as an important period in the evolution of public discussion surrounding policing in America. Eric Garner's death became one of several events that accelerated national examination of law enforcement practices. His case was frequently discussed alongside broader debates concerning use of force, constitutional protections, public accountability, and institutional reform. For many observers, the most enduring legacy of the case was not limited to legal outcomes. Instead, it lay in the questions the incident continued to raise. How should officers balance enforcement responsibilities with de-escalation? What restraint techniques present unacceptable medical risks? How should deaths occurring during police encounters be investigated? What forms of transparency best promote public confidence while protecting the integrity of investigations? These questions remain subjects of continuing legal, academic, and professional discussion. More than a decade after the events on Bay Street, the case continues to be examined not because every question has been answered, but because it illustrates the complexity of policing, accountability, and public trust in a democratic society. Eric Garner's death left a lasting mark on his family, his community, and the broader national conversation. Regardless of differing opinions regarding legal conclusions or policy responses, the historical record reflects that the incident prompted significant examination of police practices and contributed to reforms and discussions that continue to shape criminal justice today. The encounter lasted only minutes. Its impact has lasted years. As the years passed, the Eric Garner case did not disappear into the archives of American criminal justice. Instead, it remained a reference point whenever questions arose about police accountability, the use of force, or the role of video evidence in modern investigations. Long after the criminal reviews and administrative proceedings had concluded, researchers, legal professionals, journalists, and law enforcement agencies continued studying the case, not to relitigate its legal outcomes, but to better understand the decisions, systems, and circumstances that surrounded it. One reason the case remained so influential was the amount of evidence available. Unlike many earlier incidents involving police encounters, much of what happened on July 17, 2014, had been captured on video. Although the recording did not include the very beginning of the interaction, it documented much of the physical encounter that followed. That footage fundamentally changed how the public experienced the case. Millions of people were able to observe key moments directly rather than relying exclusively on written reports or second-hand descriptions. For investigators, however, the video represented only one component of a much broader evidentiary record. Professional investigations rarely depend upon a single source of information. Instead, investigators compare multiple forms of evidence to identify consistencies, resolve discrepancies where possible, and establish the most reliable reconstruction of events. In the Garner case, that process included reviewing witness statements, officer reports, dispatch records, medical findings, departmental policies, and the available video recording. Each source served a different purpose. Witnesses described what they remembered seeing and hearing, though investigators understood that human memory can vary depending on perspective, stress, and the passage of time. Official reports documented the officers' accounts of the incident. Medical findings explained the physiological factors involved in Garner's death. Departmental policies established the standards against which officer conduct would later be evaluated. Together, these materials formed the investigative record. The case also demonstrated the growing importance of digital evidence. By 2014, smartphones had become common, allowing members of the public to document events in real time. Since then, digital recordings have become increasingly significant in criminal investigations, civil litigation, and administrative reviews. Police agencies, prosecutors, and defense attorneys now routinely examine video from multiple sources, including body-worn cameras, dashboard cameras, surveillance systems, and recordings made by civilians. The Garner case became an early example of how publicly available video could influence national discussion while simultaneously serving as evidence in formal legal proceedings. Legal scholars frequently used the case to explain another important principle: public opinion and legal standards are not always the same. Criminal prosecutions require proof beyond a reasonable doubt under specific statutes. Administrative proceedings evaluate compliance with departmental rules. Civil lawsuits address legal responsibility under different evidentiary standards. Medical examiners classify causes and manners of death using forensic criteria rather than criminal law. Because these systems serve different purposes, they may reach different conclusions while examining the same underlying event. The Garner case illustrated that distinction clearly. The medical examiner classified the manner of death as homicide in the forensic sense. The Richmond County grand jury declined to issue a criminal indictment. The Department of Justice later concluded that the available evidence did not satisfy the federal criminal standard required for prosecution under applicable civil rights law. Separately, the NYPD's internal disciplinary process determined that departmental policies had been violated and resulted in Officer Daniel Pantaleo's dismissal from the department. Each outcome reflected the legal framework governing that particular proceeding rather than a contradiction among the investigations. For members of the public, understanding these distinctions was often challenging. Many observers expected every investigative process to produce the same conclusion. Legal experts, however, emphasized that different proceedings ask different questions. A criminal court asks whether a crime can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. An administrative hearing asks whether departmental rules were followed. A civil court considers liability under civil law. Each operates independently. Beyond the courtroom, the case also influenced conversations within policing itself. Training academies examined the incident while discussing arrest techniques, communication strategies, and officer decision-making under stressful conditions. Instructors emphasized that encounters involving relatively minor alleged offenses can escalate unexpectedly and therefore require careful judgment throughout every stage of an interaction. Medical considerations also became more prominent in officer training. Law enforcement professionals increasingly discussed the importance of recognizing signs of medical distress, monitoring individuals after restraint, and ensuring timely access to emergency medical care when necessary. While many departments had already addressed these topics before 2014, the Garner case contributed to renewed attention across the profession. The case also remained significant within journalism. News organizations reflected on how rapidly the cell phone recording had spread through television broadcasts and online platforms. Editors and reporters examined the responsibilities involved in presenting graphic or emotionally difficult material while maintaining factual accuracy and avoiding unnecessary sensationalism. For educators, the case provided an opportunity to explore multiple disciplines simultaneously. Law students examined constitutional issues and standards of criminal proof. Medical students reviewed forensic findings and the role of medical examiners. Journalism students discussed verification, ethics, and the influence of visual evidence. Public policy students considered how legislation and administrative rules can evolve following high-profile events. Few modern cases crossed so many professional fields at once. Public memory also evolved over time. As years passed, many people who had not closely followed the original investigation first encountered the case through documentaries, academic articles, or educational materials rather than breaking news coverage. Historians increasingly placed the Garner case within the broader context of criminal justice reform debates during the 2010s. This historical perspective emphasized both the specific facts of the case and its wider significance. Eric Garner's death remained an individual tragedy affecting one family and one community. At the same time, it became part of a larger national conversation concerning policing, transparency, public trust, and institutional accountability. Those broader discussions continue today. Police departments across the United States still review policies governing use of force. Legislatures continue considering proposals related to training, reporting requirements, and accountability mechanisms. Researchers continue studying the effectiveness of reforms adopted over the past decade. Communities continue discussing how law enforcement and residents can build stronger relationships while protecting both public safety and constitutional rights. Although opinions differ regarding particular policies or legal outcomes, there is broad agreement that the events of July 17, 2014, influenced these conversations in lasting ways. History is often remembered through major court decisions, legislative acts, or landmark speeches. Sometimes, however, history is shaped by a single recorded encounter that forces institutions and the public alike to examine long-standing questions from a new perspective. The Eric Garner case became one of those moments. Its legacy is measured not only by legal proceedings or policy changes but also by the continuing effort to understand how difficult decisions are made, how public institutions are held accountable, and how future tragedies might be prevented. Those questions did not end when the investigations closed. In many respects, they were only beginning. Behind every investigation, every legal document, every public debate, and every headline, there is a human story. The case of Eric Garner was discussed for years through the language of law, policy, and politics, but for the people closest to him, the center of the story was much simpler. A family lost someone they loved. A community lost someone they knew. And a city was forced to confront questions that reached far beyond one afternoon on a Staten Island sidewalk. For Eric Garner's relatives, July 17, 2014, represented a permanent dividing line. There was life before that day and life afterward. Before the encounter on Bay Street, Eric Garner was known primarily by those around him, as a father, a partner, a friend, and a familiar presence in his neighborhood. After his death, his name became recognized across the world. The transformation was sudden and painful. A private family tragedy became a national conversation. Garner's family had to grieve while simultaneously watching images of his final moments replayed repeatedly in the media. The cell phone recording that became central to public discussion was also a reminder of the most difficult moment of their lives. Each broadcast, each online discussion, and each public debate brought renewed attention to an event that they experienced personally as a devastating loss. His relatives consistently emphasized that Eric Garner was more than the circumstances surrounding his death. They spoke about his role within the family and the community, describing him as someone who enjoyed spending time with people around him. They wanted the public to recognize that behind the legal arguments and political discussions was a person with relationships, memories, and a history that existed long before July 2014. This became one of the central themes expressed by many families involved in highly publicized cases involving police encounters, the importance of remembering the individual rather than allowing the person to become only a symbol. As the case gained national attention, members of Garner's family became involved in advocacy efforts. They attended demonstrations, spoke with journalists, and called for changes they believed could prevent similar incidents in the future. Among the most visible voices was Eric Garner's daughter, Erica Garner. After her father's death, Erica became an outspoken advocate for police accountability and criminal justice reform. She appeared at public events, participated in interviews, and continued speaking about her father's case. Her advocacy brought additional attention to the personal experiences of families affected by deaths involving law enforcement. For Erica, the issue was not only about the legal outcome of one investigation. It was also about broader questions surrounding accountability, transparency, and how communities interact with institutions of authority. Her public role placed her under intense attention. She became both a grieving daughter and a public figure, a position that carried significant emotional weight. She continued advocating despite the challenges of repeatedly discussing a painful personal loss in front of large audiences. In December 2017, Erica Garner died at the age of 27 after suffering complications related to an asthma-related medical condition. Her death added another painful chapter to the Garner family story. Many people who had followed her advocacy remembered her not only for her connection to Eric Garner, but also for her determination to continue speaking publicly about issues she believed were important. The impact of Eric Garner's death was also deeply felt within Staten Island. The neighborhood where the encounter occurred became a place of remembrance and protest. Residents gathered to discuss what had happened and what it represented. Some community members focused on concerns about police practices, while others discussed the challenges officers face when responding to public complaints. The conversations were often complex because the community itself was not defined by a single opinion. As in many neighborhoods across America, residents held different perspectives. Some believed the incident demonstrated the need for significant changes in policing. Others argued that officers must be allowed to enforce laws and maintain public order. Many people expressed a desire for both accountability and safety, recognizing that communities need effective policing while also expecting officers to use appropriate judgment and restraint. This tension became one of the defining themes of the national debate that followed. The case also highlighted the broader issue of how low-level enforcement affects relationships between police and residents. The complaint that brought officers to Bay Street involved allegations of selling untaxed cigarettes, not a violent crime. Supporters of quality-of-life enforcement argued that addressing minor violations could improve neighborhood conditions and prevent larger problems. Critics argued that frequent enforcement of minor offenses could damage trust, particularly in communities where residents already felt heavily monitored by police. Eric Garner's case became part of this larger discussion. The question was not only what happened during those final minutes, but also how everyday interactions between citizens and law enforcement shape public confidence over time. For many community leaders, one of the lasting lessons from the case involved communication. They argued that respectful interactions, transparency, and community engagement are essential components of effective policing. Trust, they noted, is built through thousands of routine encounters rather than through official statements released after a crisis. Law enforcement officials also examined the case from their perspective. Police organizations emphasized the difficult nature of making decisions during rapidly changing encounters. Officers often work in unpredictable environments where they must balance public safety, legal authority, and individual rights. The Garner case became part of discussions among law enforcement professionals about training, supervision, and the importance of recognizing when an encounter is escalating. The challenge for police departments was finding ways to reduce unnecessary escalation while still allowing officers to perform their duties effectively. This debate continues because the issues involved are not simple. Public safety and accountability are not opposing goals. Many experts argue that communities are safest when residents trust law enforcement and believe that officers operate fairly and responsibly. Conversely, police departments often emphasize that public cooperation is essential for effective crime prevention and investigation. The Garner case placed these competing needs directly into national focus. Beyond policy discussions, there was also the question of memory. How should society remember individuals involved in controversial events? For some, Eric Garner became a symbol of concerns about police use of force. For others, he represented a broader discussion about the complexity of law enforcement encounters. But for his family, he remained Eric. A father. A relative. A person whose life contained far more than the final moments captured on video. This distinction became especially important as years passed. Public attention often moves quickly from one major event to another, but families affected by tragedy continue living with the consequences long after cameras leave and headlines disappear. The Garner family's experience reflected a reality shared by many families involved in nationally recognized cases. The world may move forward, but personal grief does not follow the same timeline. The years after Eric Garner's death brought legal conclusions, policy discussions, and social movements. But they also brought birthdays without him. Family gatherings where his absence was felt. Memories of conversations and moments that could never be repeated. The public often remembers cases through dates and documents. Families remember them through people. That difference is one of the most important aspects of understanding any real-life tragedy. The story of Eric Garner is not only about a police encounter, a video recording, or a legal investigation. It is also about the human consequences that follow when a life is lost. And it is about the continuing search for answers by those left behind. Years after the events of July 17, 2014, the name Eric Garner remained deeply connected to one of the most important debates in modern American history, the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. The encounter on Bay Street lasted only a short period of time. The investigation that followed lasted years. But the questions raised by those few minutes continued long after court decisions were reached and official reviews were completed. The significance of the case was not created by a single event alone. It emerged from the intersection of several powerful forces: the availability of cell phone video, growing public concern about police use of force, debates over community policing, and a national demand for greater transparency from public institutions. Eric Garner's death became one of the cases that forced many Americans to examine issues that had existed for decades. How should police respond during encounters involving minor offenses? When does physical restraint become excessive? How should officers balance enforcement responsibilities with the duty to protect human life? How can communities build trust with the institutions responsible for public safety? These questions had no simple answers, but the Garner case pushed them into the center of national discussion. One of the most lasting elements of the case was the role of technology. The cell phone video recorded by Ramsey Alter demonstrated how a single individual with a smartphone could transform a local event into a national conversation. Before the widespread use of smartphones, many police encounters were understood primarily through official reports, statements from involved parties, and witness accounts. By 2014, that landscape had changed. A person standing on a sidewalk could document events in real time and share them with the world within minutes. This development altered public expectations. Many people began viewing video evidence as an important tool for accountability. If an incident was recorded, the public expected the footage to be reviewed carefully and transparently. The existence of video changed how communities, journalists, and officials evaluated disputed events. At the same time, experts emphasized that video recordings, while valuable, are not always complete explanations of complex situations. A camera may capture important moments but not every detail surrounding an encounter. It may not show what happened before recording began, what individuals perceived at the time, or what circumstances influenced decisions. For investigators, video is evidence. It is not always the entire story. This distinction became an important lesson from the Garner case. The case also influenced discussions about the concept of quality of life policing. For decades, many cities had adopted strategies focused on enforcing lower-level violations. Supporters argued that visible enforcement could improve neighborhood conditions and prevent more serious crime. Critics questioned whether aggressive enforcement of minor offenses created unnecessary confrontations and damaged relationships between residents and police. The Garner case brought renewed attention to this debate because the initial complaint involved alleged untaxed cigarette sales, a non-violent offense. The tragedy raised questions about proportionality. Many observers asked whether certain enforcement encounters carried risks that outweighed the importance of the alleged violation. Others argued that officers still have responsibilities to enforce laws regardless of whether violations are considered minor. The debate reflected a broader challenge faced by modern cities, determining how police resources should be used while maintaining both safety and public trust. Following Garner's death, many police departments reviewed their own approaches to low-level enforcement and officer decision-making. Some expanded training related to de-escalation. Some changed reporting procedures. Some increased supervisory oversight of force incidents. Others introduced or expanded community engagement programs designed to improve communication between officers and residents. These reforms varied widely, and experts continued debating which approaches were most effective. Another major influence of the Garner case was its connection to the broader Black Lives Matter movement. Although the movement had begun before 2014, several high-profile cases that year contributed to a significant increase in national visibility. Eric Garner's name became one of the most recognized associated with discussions about racial disparities, police accountability, and criminal justice reform. The phrase, "I can't breathe," became a symbol used by demonstrators across the country. For many participants, those words represented concerns about the treatment of Black Americans during interactions with law enforcement. For others, the phrase represented the importance of examining police practices through evidence, policy, and legal standards. Regardless of differing interpretations, the phrase became one of the most recognizable expressions connected to debates about policing in the United States. The case also affected political discussions. Local, state, and federal officials proposed or supported various reforms related to police training, use of force standards, transparency requirements, and accountability systems. Some proposals became law or policy changes, while others remained subjects of debate. The national conversation continued because the underlying issues were complex. Changing policies alone could not automatically resolve questions of trust and legitimacy. Many experts argued that meaningful improvement requires both institutional reform and cultural change within organizations. Police departments needed clear standards, effective training, and accountability systems. Communities needed opportunities to communicate concerns and participate in discussions about public safety. Both sides recognized that cooperation is essential, but achieving that cooperation remained a challenge. The Garner case also influenced how future incidents were documented and reviewed. Following several highly publicized police encounters, many departments accelerated the adoption of body-worn cameras. Supporters argued that these devices could provide valuable evidence and increase transparency. Critics noted that cameras alone cannot solve deeper issues involving training, policy, or organizational culture. The broader lesson was that technology can document events, but institutions must still determine how to respond to what the evidence reveals. For researchers studying criminal justice, the Garner case provided a significant example of how public perception, legal processes, and institutional responses interact. A single incident can move through multiple systems. The criminal justice system evaluates possible violations of law. Administrative systems evaluate compliance with professional standards. Civil courts address legal responsibility and compensation. Public institutions evaluate policy changes. Media organizations shape public understanding. Communities interpret events through personal experiences and historical relationships. Each system views the same event from a different perspective. That complexity explains why cases like Garner's continue to generate discussion years later. There is rarely one question or one answer. There are multiple layers involving law, policy, human behavior, institutional responsibility, and individual experience. Perhaps the most enduring impact of Eric Garner's case is that it changed the way many people viewed police encounters. A routine interaction could no longer be understood only through official statements. A citizen's recording could become a central part of public accountability. A neighborhood incident could become a national discussion. And a person's final moments could force an entire country to examine difficult questions about justice and fairness. For Eric Garner's family, however, the legacy remains deeply personal. No policy change, public debate, or historical recognition can replace the person they lost. The national conversation may continue evolving, but the personal loss remains permanent. That is the difficult reality behind cases that become symbols. Symbols represent ideas. But before someone becomes a symbol, they are a person. Eric Garner was a person before he became a name known around the world. An understanding that human reality remains essential when examining the lasting legacy of his case. By the end of the major investigations, the legal proceedings surrounding Eric Garner's death had largely concluded. The criminal reviews had reached their outcomes. The administrative process within the New York City Police Department had ended with the dismissal of Officer Daniel Pantaleo. Civil litigation had been resolved through settlement. The federal civil rights investigation had also reached its conclusion. Yet, in many respects, the broader conversation was only beginning. For law enforcement agencies across the United States, The case became one of several high-profile incidents that prompted renewed examination of training, supervision, and the use of force. While no single case alone reshaped policing nationwide, the Garner case contributed significantly to discussions that were already emerging within professional policing organizations, academic institutions, and government agencies. One of the first areas to receive renewed attention was de-escalation. Police officers routinely encounter situations that evolve quickly and unpredictably. Many interactions begin as routine calls for service but can become confrontational within seconds. Because of this reality, modern policing increasingly emphasizes communication techniques intended to reduce tension before physical force becomes necessary. Training programs expanded their focus on verbal communication, conflict management, and recognizing opportunities to slow encounters whenever circumstances safely permit. Law enforcement instructors often stress that effective policing involves more than enforcing laws. It also requires the ability to assess human behavior, adapt to changing circumstances, and make decisions under pressure. The Garner case became one example discussed in training environments when examining how encounters can escalate rapidly. Another significant area of discussion involved restraint techniques. Long before 2014, many police departments had already restricted or prohibited chokeholds because of the medical risks associated with neck compression. Following Garner's death, agencies revisited their existing policies to determine whether they clearly defined prohibited techniques, whether officers understood those standards, and whether violations would be consistently addressed. Some departments revised written policies. Others strengthened reporting requirements whenever force involving the head, neck, or upper torso was used. Several jurisdictions also expanded supervisory review of incidents involving physical restraint. These reviews reflected a broader recognition that even lawful arrests require continuous assessment of an individual's physical condition. Medical response became another important focus. Emergency physicians, forensic experts, and police trainers emphasized that individuals under restraint should be monitored carefully for signs of medical distress. Officers increasingly received additional instruction concerning respiratory emergencies, unconsciousness, and the importance of obtaining medical assistance promptly whenever a person's condition appeared to deteriorate. Many departments also reviewed procedures governing communication with emergency medical personnel following significant use of force incidents. Technology continued evolving as well. Although body-worn cameras already existed before 2014, their use expanded considerably in the years that followed. Police agencies viewed body cameras as one method of improving transparency and preserving evidence. Recordings made by officers could supplement witness statements, dispatch records, surveillance footage, and civilian videos during subsequent investigations. Supporters argued that body cameras benefited both officers and members of the public by providing additional documentation of police encounters. Researchers studying body camera programs found varying results depending on department policies, activation requirements, and implementation strategies. While cameras alone could not eliminate controversy or prevent every disputed incident, they became an increasingly common component of modern policing. The Garner case also encouraged broader discussions concerning transparency. Public confidence in investigations often depends not only upon investigative quality but also upon public understanding of investigative processes. Officials increasingly recognized the importance of explaining legal procedures, evidentiary standards, and the different purposes served by criminal investigations, administrative reviews, and civil litigation. Cases involving police use of force often involve multiple independent investigations occurring simultaneously. Each examines different legal questions. Each applies different standards. Each may reasonably reach different conclusions based upon its governing legal framework. Public education concerning these distinctions became an important objective for prosecutors, police departments, and legal experts. The Garner investigation also highlighted the growing role of independent oversight. Many jurisdictions expanded civilian review boards, inspector general offices, or independent investigative units responsible for reviewing serious incidents involving law enforcement officers. The structure of these oversight systems varies across states and municipalities, reflecting differences in local law and governmental organization. Nevertheless, the underlying objective remains consistent, ensuring that investigations involving serious police incidents are conducted fairly, thoroughly, and transparently. Academic researchers continued studying the Garner case from numerous perspectives. Criminal justice scholars examined investigative procedures and accountability mechanisms. Legal scholars analyzed constitutional standards governing arrests and use of force. Medical researchers explored restraint-related risks and emergency response considerations. Sociologists examined public trust, institutional legitimacy, and community perceptions of law enforcement. Journalists studied the influence of cell phone video and digital media on public understanding of major events. The case demonstrated how a single incident could become relevant across multiple disciplines. It also illustrated the importance of distinguishing verified evidence from speculation. Throughout the years following Garner's death, investigators consistently relied upon documentary evidence, witness interviews, medical findings, and applicable law rather than assumptions or public opinion. That approach reflects a fundamental principle of criminal justice. Investigations must be grounded in evidence. Legal conclusions must follow established standards. Public debate, while important in democratic societies, does not replace formal investigative processes. At the same time, public discussion can influence future policy. Many reforms adopted after highly publicized incidents emerge through legislative action, administrative review, professional training, or community engagement rather than through courtroom decisions alone. The Garner case became one example of how public attention can contribute to institutional reflection. Police leaders also emphasized an important operational lesson. Many officer-citizen encounters involve relatively minor allegations. Yet even routine calls require careful judgment because circumstances can change rapidly. Professional policing therefore depends upon continuous assessment rather than automatic responses. Communication, situational awareness, proportionality, and medical observation all remain essential throughout an encounter, not only during its beginning but also after physical control has been established. Community organizations likewise continued emphasizing trust. Research consistently suggests that effective policing depends upon cooperation between officers and the communities they serve. Residents are more likely to report crimes, provide witness information, and cooperate with investigations when they believe law enforcement acts fairly and respectfully. Building that trust requires consistent effort over many years. It cannot be achieved through policy changes alone. Nor can it depend solely upon individual officers. Instead, trust develops through institutional culture, leadership, accountability, communication, and everyday interactions. Looking back, historians increasingly identified the Garner case as part of a broader period during which American policing underwent significant public examination. The years following 2014 saw extensive discussion concerning use of force, transparency, officer wellness, community partnerships, constitutional policing, and accountability. While opinions regarding particular reforms continue to differ, there is broad recognition that these discussions influenced law enforcement practices across many jurisdictions. More than a decade after the events on Bay Street, Eric Garner's case remains part of educational programs, professional training, legal scholarship, and public policy discussions. Its significance lies not only in the legal proceedings that followed but also in the continuing effort to improve how police officers serve their communities while protecting individual rights and maintaining public safety. The questions raised by the case have not disappeared. They continue to shape conversations about justice, responsibility, transparency, and the relationship between public institutions and the people they exist to serve. For that reason, the Garner case remains an important chapter in the ongoing history of criminal justice in the United States, not because it provided easy answers, but because it encouraged continuing examination of some of the most challenging questions facing modern democratic societies.